Hey guys, tonight we're rewinding to a time when gods had side hustles. Specifically, the day Apollo, literal god of the sun, decided moonlighting as a shepherd sounded like a vibe. Picture this. You're lounging on a cloud, sipping ambrosia, and suddenly eternity feels long. That's Apollo's dilemma. The dude's resume includes lighting the sky, inventing music, and occasionally turning people into trees. But even divine perks get old. So when Hermes mentions mortals have this thing called weekends, Apollo's like, say less. Now, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and local time. Let's see who's listening from the future or past. Time zones are weird. So, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're Apollo. Your job is literally to move a flaming ball across the sky every day. And let's be real, it's not exactly a creative challenge anymore. You've composed enough hymns to make a lyre weep, healed enough plagues to earn a celestial employee of the Millennium mug, which, by the way, Hera still hasn't given you. Even your prophecies at Delphi are starting to feel like cosmic customer service. Yes, mortal, your fate is vague but ominous. Have a nice day. Enter Hermes, wing-footed menace, and Olympus's worst, best gossip. He's fresh off Immortal bender, raving about these shepherd guys who just chill with sheep all day, nap under trees, and, get this, don't answer to anyone. No thunderbolts from Zeus if they oversleep. No angry villagers demanding rain dances. Just grass, sky, and the occasional wolf-related adrenaline rush. Apollo's golden brow furrows. This, he thinks, is what's missing from my immortal existence. Stakes that aren't apocalyptic. Historians still argue whether this was a midlife crisis or a PR stunt, Divinity Edition. But one morning, Apollo does the unthinkable. He leaves his sun chariot parked. Helios, ever the freelancer, covers his shift and descends to Earth in mortal cosplay. No radiant glow, no aura of terror. Just a suspiciously handsome guy in a fleece jacket. His first mistake? Assuming shepherd's dress like the cover of a bucolic poetry anthology. The Olympian rumor mill is spinning faster than Hermes' winged sandals as word gets out that Apollo has gone rogue. You'd think gods would have better things to do than gossip. But nope, even deities need their drama fix. Picture Zeus scrolling through godly DMs like, "Bro, your kid's herding sheep now?" While Hera side eyes the whole situation because of course her least favorite stepson is causing a scene again. Meanwhile, Apollo's getting the full mortal onboarding experience. His first lesson: sheep don't care if you're a god. You could be holding a glowing lyre made of pure sunlight, and they'd still stare at you like you're the idiot who forgot the grass stops being edible after winter. And let's talk about the shepherd's crook. Apollo's used to wielding a bow that never misses, but this stick, it has opinions. The first time he tries to nudge a stray sheep back to the flock, the crook gets tangled in his own legs. The sheep blatantly ignores him. Somewhere on Mount Olympus, Artemis is wheezed laughing so hard her hunting dogs start howling in concern. Historians still argue whether Apollo's stint was inspired by actual ancient shepherding practices or just a really elaborate way to avoid his godly inbox. But here's a quirky tidbit. Real Greek shepherds used to sing to their flocks, not for fun, but because sheep apparently memorize melodies and will follow the sound. Try that with your dog and see how far you get. Apollo, being the original music influencer, takes this to extremes. By noon, he's composed 3 experimental ballads in the Dorian mode, which the sheep tolerate slightly more than his attempts at herding. And then there's the weather. Back in the god office, Apollo could just snap for perfect 75-degree sunshine. Now, he's at the mercy of the elements like some kind of peasant. When a surprise rainstorm hits, He has to physically hustle the flock to shelter instead of just willing the clouds away. The indignity. By sunset, he's damp, sore, and weirdly invested in whether that one lamb with the spot over its eye made it back safely. By day 3, Apollo is starting to understand why mortals complain so much about their knees. Who knew standing on hillsides for hours could make a god's joints creak? You'd think immortality would come with better shock absorption, but here he is, stretching his back like an old mortal while the sheep graze obliviously. At least the view is nice, rolling green pastures instead of the same old gilded halls of Olympus, though he does miss the ability to smite things when frustrated. The other shepherds have accepted him with cautious curiosity. They don't question why the new guy never seems to eat, or why his skin stays suspiciously sunburn-free despite hours in the blazing heat. But they do side-eye him when he absent-mindedly makes a flower bloom by tapping it with his foot. Lucky guess? He offers weakly. They pretend to buy it. Then comes the wolf. It's twilight when the predator slinks from the tree lean, all yellow eyes and bared teeth. The sheep panic instantly, bleeding and stampeding in circles. The mortal shepherds grab their spears, shouting to form a defensive line. But Apollo? Oh, Apollo forgets he's supposed to be mortal for a hot second. One snap of his fingers later, the wolf is floating mid-air, whining pitifully as an invisible force holds it in place. The shepherds freeze. The wolf whimpers. Apollo realizes his mistake approximately 2 seconds too late. So, coughs the eldest shepherd after an awkward silence. You're real good with animals. Apollo coughs back. Yep, just a natural. He releases the wolf, which bolts for the woods like Hades himself is chasing it. The shepherds exchange glances but don't press further. That night around the campfire, someone passes Apollo the wineskin first. A quiet acknowledgement that whatever he is, he's one of them now. Historians still argue whether this incident inspired later myths of Apollo's animal dominion, but here's a fun fact. Ancient shepherds often kept wolf dogs, massive, fluffy guardians bred to protect flocks. Basically, the ancient equivalent of installing a security system. Apollo, of course, could have just hired one of those instead of nearly blowing his cover. But where's the drama in that? The moon hangs heavy over the pasture as Apollo discovers the mortal curse known as blisters. You'd think a god who drives a chariot of fire across the sky daily would have calluses tough enough to handle a little shepherd's crook. But no. His palms are a war zone of raw skin and regret. He stares at his hands like they've betrayed him. They have. Nearby, the mortal shepherds are snickering into their wine. One tosses him a jar of suspicious-smelling salve made from olive oil and other things. Apollo hesitates. Back in Olympus, his healing powers could fix this in a blink. Here, he's stuck rubbing questionable goo on his hands like a common peasant. The indignity burns worse than the blisters. The next morning brings another indignity. Hunger. Not the performative, I could snack hunger of the gods, but the gnawing, insistent kind that makes your stomach growl loud enough to startle sheep. Turns out, pretending to be mortal means eating like one too. When he tries to discreetly miracle up some ambrosia, the loaf of coarse barley bread a shepherd shoves into his hands is surprisingly good. The flavor is earthy, the crust crackles between his teeth, and for the first time in centuries, eating feels like more than a ceremonial act. He eats 3 more loaves just because he can. But the real shock comes at midday, when exhaustion hits him like one of Zeus's poorly aimed lightning bolts. Gods don't sleep. They recharge in a state of divine contemplation, or whatever euphemism Hera coined to sound fancy. Yet here Apollo is, slumped against a tree, eyelids drooping as the sheep's rhythmic chewing becomes the world's most boring lullaby. He dreams of floating in the Lethe, weightless and warm, until a shepherd's boot nudges his ribs. "Shifts over, pretty boy," the man grunts. Apollo blinks, crusty eyes open to see the sun nearly set. He's slept through hours of his own domain's movement. The horror. Historians still argue whether Apollo's brief mortality was voluntary or some sneaky punishment from Zeus. Classic dad move. But here's a quirky tidbit. Ancient Greek shepherds napped in shifts, using water clocks made from pierced gourds to time their rests. Apollo, of course, could have just asked the sun for the time, if he weren't busy committing to the bit. The sheep have officially become Apollo's nemesis. You'd think creatures whose entire existence revolves around eating and walking in straight lines would be easy to manage. But no, these woolly anarchists treat Apollo's divine authority like a suggestion. That one spotted you? She's the ringleader. Every time Apollo turns his back, she's leading a mutiny toward the rocky cliffs where the grass is spicier. Read, non-existent. The other shepherds chuckle as he sprints after them, sandals skidding on loose stones. "They're testing you," the oldest shepherd remarks, spitting into the dirt. "Sheep know when you're new." Apollo glares at the flock. Back in Delphi, pilgrims trembled at his prophecies. Now, a lamb chews audibly on his chitin hem. Then comes the poetry incident. It starts innocently enough. Apollo's composing a new hymn in his head as one does, fingers tapping the rhythm against his crook. But when he absent-mindedly starts singing it aloud, the sheep freeze. The spotted ewe lifts her head. For one glorious moment, Apollo thinks he's finally commanded their respect. Then the entire flock stampedes in the opposite direction, bleeding like he's just butchered the national anthem. Turns out, Apollo's divine voice is apparently canine frequency torture for sheep. The mortal shepherds are wheezing too hard to help. Historians still argue whether this humiliation inspired Apollo's later rivalry with Marsyas, the satyr who foolishly challenged him to a music contest. But here's a fun fact. Ancient shepherds actually used specific flute melodies to guide flocks. Simple, repetitive tunes that didn't send sheep into existential crises. Too bad no one gave Apollo the memo. By week's end, two things are clear. Sheep have zero respect for divinity. Apollo's ego has never been healthier. There's something perversely refreshing about being judged solely on your ability to keep grass munchers alive. No prophecies, no cosmic responsibilities. Just you, a stick, and the eternal struggle against woolly chaos. When the spotted ewe finally lets him scratch behind her ears without bolting, it feels like winning a war. The storm rolls in at dusk like a drunken titan, all thunder and misplaced fury. One moment the sky is twilight pink. The next, it's vomiting rain so thick Apollo can barely see the sheep huddling in panic. The mortal shepherds are already herding the flock toward the rocky overhang they use for shelter, shouting over the wind. Apollo hesitates. He could end this in a heartbeat, a flick of his wrist, a whispered command to the winds, and the clouds would scatter like chastened children. But that's the problem. He's not supposed to have that power here. Lightning forks the sky. The spotted ewe, that traitorous woolen rebel, is suddenly limping, her leg tangled in a thorn bush. Apollo swears in ancient Thessalian, a dialect so dead even the fates don't remember it, and does the unthinkable. He plays mortal. No miracles, no weather control. Just his hands ripping through brambles as rain soaks him to the bone. The thorns tear his skin. Actual blood wells up, golden and glowing faintly before he remembers to dim it. He hauls the ewe into his arms like a fussy, damp boulder and runs for the cave. Inside, the shepherds gawk, not at the glowing blood, thankfully now disguised, but at the fact Apollo's carrying a full-grown sheep like it's a slightly disagreeable backpack. "She's heavy," he wheezes, which is true. Mortals weren't designed to haul livestock at a sprint. The spotted you chooses this moment to sneeze directly into his face. Historians still argue whether this storm was natural or Poseidon being petty. The sea god did owe Apollo 3 drachma from Poker Night. But here's a quirky tidbit. Ancient shepherds waterproofed their cloaks with lanolin from sheep's wool, making them smell like a cross between a candle shop and a barnyard. Apollo's now wearing one, and the scent is haunting him. As the storm rages outside, something shifts. The shepherds stop treating Apollo like a weirdly strong intern and start ribbing him like family. One tosses him a wineskin with a grin. To the city boy who can't tell hail from Zeus's dandruff, Apollo drinks. The wine is terrible. He laughs anyway. The shepherdess from the northern pasture has been staring at Apollo for 3 days straight. At first, he assumes it's because he's obviously radiant even in mortal guise. Old habits die hard. But when she finally approaches, it's to bluntly inform him that his sheep whispering techniques are reckless and will get someone killed. Apollo, mid-sip from the communal wineskin, nearly chokes. "I'll have you know," he says with all the dignity of a sun god turned ranch hand. "That spotted you loves me now." The shepherdess, Lysandra, as he learns, rolls her eyes so hard it's audible. "That you is a ram, and he's plotting your demise." Apollo looks over at the spotted menace, who promptly chews a hole through his abandoned cloak. Lysandra becomes his unlikely tutor, schooling him in the subtle arts of actual shepherding. Which plants make sheep sick? No, Apollo, you can't just heal them afterward. How to read weather in the flight patterns of sparrows. Stop trying to ask the birds, they're not your spies. And the critical importance of not singing near pregnant livestock. That ballad made 6 goats miscarry. 6. Historians still argue whether Lysandra was based on a real historical figure or just Apollo's ego needing a narrative foil. But here's a fun fact. Ancient Greek shepherdesses were often accomplished hunters, using slings to protect flocks, a skill Artemis would have respected. Lysandra's sling stones always hit their mark, though she denies it's anything but practice. When Apollo accidentally leaves his bow in her path, she uses it to roast rabbits over the fire like a kebab skewer. The message is clear. The real trouble starts when Apollo slips up and calls her mortal one too many times. Lysandra freezes. "You say that like it's a species." Apollo panics. "It's a regional dialect? From my village." "Your village that doesn't sleep, eat, or bleed, right?" She snaps a twig in half. "Tell me the truth or leave." For the first time in centuries, Apollo feels the weight of a mortal's trust and how fragile it is. Apollo does the dumbest thing possible. He tells the truth. Not the full truth. Even now, he can't resist a dramatic reveal. But enough. "I'm not from around here," he admits, staring at the campfire like it holds answers. "I'm sort of between jobs." Lysandra's expression doesn't change. "So you're a runaway aristocrat, or a criminal. Worse," Apollo mutters. "A god." The silence that follows is the kind usually reserved for funerals and bad prophecies. Then Lysandra bursts out laughing. Not polite laughter, but the full body, snorting kind that makes her double over. "Oh, that's good," she wheezes. "Next you'll tell me you're Apollo and this is all some divine vacation." Apollo's face does something complicated. Lysandra's laughter dies mid-snort. "No," a beat. Then she's on her feet, backing away like he's a live grenade. "Prove it." Apollo sighs. This is why he prefers oracles, they expect theatrics. With a snap, his disguise melts away in a cascade of golden light. His skin glows faintly, his hair floats as if underwater, and his eyes, well, let's just say looking directly at them is like staring into a solar eclipse. The entire campsite smells suddenly of laurel and burnt honey. Lysandra doesn't faint, points for her, but she does sit down very hard. You, the actual Apollo, have been letting my ram step on your cloak for a week. His name is Spots, Apollo says defensively. Historians still argue whether this was the greatest identity reveal in pastoral history or just Apollo being extra. But here's a quirky tidbit. Ancient Greeks believed gods walking among them left divine footprints, areas where crops grew taller or water turned sweet. The next morning, the shepherds find the entire pasture dotted with perfect circles of hypergreen grass, where Apollo paced nervously waiting for Lyssandra's verdict. She finds him at dawn, tossing pebbles into a creek. So, sun god, shepherd, he counters. Lysandra grins. Teach me to shoot like Artemis and we'll call it even. The village festival is a disaster waiting to happen, and Apollo RSVPs hard. You'd think a god who spent weeks carefully hiding his divinity would avoid crowded mortal celebrations. But no. Apollo takes one look at the garland-strewn square and declares, "I'm winning every competition." Lysandra tries to warn him, "They'll notice when you literally glow during the dance-off." But it's too late. Apollo's already elbow-deep in olive oil, signing up for the wrestling tournament. First up, archery. Apollo's been coaching Lysandra for days, but when she steps up to shoot, her hands shake. The crowd murmurs as her arrow veers left, until a sudden breeze, totally natural wink, nudges it dead center. Lysandra whirls to glare at Apollo. He mouths what could have been Zeus. Then comes the poetry slam. Apollo restrains himself to just one epic about the radiant, incredibly humble shepherd who saved his flock, naming no names. But his meter is too perfect, his metaphors too divine. The village bard accuses him of plagiarism. Chaos ensues. Historians still argue whether this festival inspired later Panhellenic games. But here's a fun fact. Ancient Greek competitions often included mystery events, where participants didn't know the rules until they started. Apollo, of course, aces these, until the cheese-rolling contest, where his divine reflexes send the wheel flying into a magistrate's lap. The real trouble starts at dusk, when the bonfire dancing begins. Apollo forgets himself. One moment he's mortal stepping awkwardly, the next he's backflipping over flames like his chariots in the Indy 500. The crowd goes silent. A child points and shrieks, "Mommy, that man's on fire." He's not. Probably. Lysandra drags him away by his ear. "Congratulations. You've been officially voted most likely to be a demigod by the entire village." Apollo beams. Finally, some recognition. The summons from Olympus arrives via the world's most passive-aggressive eagle. It swoops down during Apollo's morning sheep count, dropping a scroll so heavily gilded it knocks over a water bucket. The message is pure Zeus. When you're done slumming it with the mortals, your sun chariot is double parked over Crete. Also, Hera says you owe her 3 goats. Lysandra reads it over his shoulder. So, fired. Temporarily reassigned. Apollo grumbles, kicking a rock. It arcs perfectly into a rabbit hole 3 pastures away. The problem is, he's not ready to leave. There's still so much to do, like teaching Lysandra that archery trick with the ricocheting arrows, or figuring out why Spots the ram now follows him like a woolly bodyguard. Not to mention the sheepdog trials next week. Apollo may have promised the villagers a spectacle, but Olympus doesn't negotiate. By noon, storm clouds gather unnaturally over the pasture, the kind that smell like ozone and paternal disappointment. The other shepherds sense the shift. They start leaving gifts by Apollo's sleeping roll. A carved flute, a jar of that questionable salve, a very dented wine cup. No speeches, just quiet nods. Even Spots headbutts him gently, which, for Spots, is basically a declaration of love. Historians still argue whether Apollo's departure was truly voluntary, but here's a quirky tidbit. Ancient Greeks believed abandoned godly disguises sometimes lingered as mortal echoes, ghostly figures seen herding sheep or playing lyres in remote areas. To this day, Thessalian shepherds swear they've met a strangely radiant stranger who gives terrible farming advice. As Apollo packs his, now extremely holy, cloak, Lysandra tosses him a sling. For when you're back to being important and need to remember how to aim without magic. Apollo grins. Come to Delphi sometime. I'll give you a prophecy. Make it Lysandra will become rich and we'll talk. Apollo's return to godhood is underwhelming. You'd think after weeks of mortal living, stepping back into his sun chariot would feel like slipping into a tailored suit. Instead, the reins feel too light in his hands. The horses, ethereal beasts of pure flame, snort impatiently when he hesitates. Move! Helios grumbles from his backup chariot, because apparently the sun waits for no god's existential crisis. As Apollo ascends, he glances down. The pasture is a tiny green speck now, but he swears he sees Lysandra's sling flash in the sunlight. One final middle finger to the divine. Olympus is exactly as he left it. Hermes is mid-prank, Ares is yelling about something, and Hera's side-eyeing everyone. The only difference? Now they know. So, Hermes materializes beside him, grinning. How's the sheep life? Apollo expects teasing. What he gets is curiosity. Dionysus wants tasting notes on mortal wine. Athena asks about pastoral governance structures. Even Artemis admits she's impressed by his wolf handling, though she'll die before saying it again. Historians still argue whether Apollo's experiment changed god-mortal relations, but here's a fun fact. After this, offerings at Apollo's temples included an unusual amount of shepherds' crooks and wool. Coincidence? Probably not. That night, Apollo does something unprecedented. He sleeps. Not godly meditation, but proper mortal-style unconsciousness. When he dreams, it's of grass stains and terrible wine and a spotted ram judging him from a cliff. He wakes smiling. The mortals write songs about him. Not the usual hymns. Those were always transactional. Praise Apollo and maybe he won't give us plague. But rowdy tavern tunes about the sun god who herded sheep. By the next full moon, there are at least 5 conflicting versions of the story circulating. The pastoral epic, Apollo lives as a humble shepherd to understand mortal struggles, mostly false. He just wanted a break. The love ballad, he fell for a shepherdess and abandoned Olympus. Lysandra would stab anyone who suggests this. The divine punishment, Zeus turned him mortal for bad lyre etiquette. Apollo considers suing for slander. Worst of all, the songs are catchy. Apollo catches Hermes humming one while adjusting his sandals. It's got a good beat. Hermes defends, vanishing before Apollo can yeet a sunbeam at him. Meanwhile, down on Earth, Lysandra is thriving. The village built her a bigger pasture. The spotted ram has his own fan club. And when travelers ask about the god who walked among shepherds, she charges 3 drachma per exclusive true story, all heavily embellished. Apollo watches from his sun chariot, torn between pride and petty jealousy. He starts leaving little divine gifts, a perfect berry in her lunch, a breeze that always pushes her arrows true. One day, a carved lyre appears at her doorstep with a note. For the ballads about me, make them better. Historians still argue whether this was the first celebrity fan-mortal relationship, but here's a quirky tidbit. Ancient Greek shepherds often named their best sheep after gods, except Apollo. After this incident, most were named not Apollo just to be safe. Zeus calls an emergency family meeting. Not about wars or prophecies, no, this is strictly about the branding crisis Apollo has caused. We're losing mystique. Zeus booms, lightning flickering in his beard. First you heard sheep. Now Demeter wants to try farming tourism. Apollo slouches on his throne. You're just mad because mortals painted you as the villain in their songs. Ares snorts. Hera hides a smile. The real trouble starts when Artemis drops her bombshell. I'm visiting the Pasture next week. The council gasps. The goddess of the hunt, mingling with mortal shepherds? Apollo's equal parts thrilled and terrified. Down on Earth, Lysandra receives the news via a very flustered village elder. The Artemis? Here. She immediately starts training the sheep to formation march. Spots the ram, sensing drama, practices his most intimidating glare. Historians still argue whether this was divine cultural exchange or just Olympus's weirdest field trip. But here's a fun fact. Ancient hunting lodges near pastoral areas often had Artemis-friendly policies. No loud noises before noon, mandatory moon viewing spots, and strict no-flirting rules. When Artemis arrives, it's anticlimactic. She and Lysandra bond instantly over archery and wolf-hating. The sheep behave unnaturally well, spots bows. Bows, traitor. And Apollo? He's too busy panicking that his two worlds have collided to notice Artemis slip Lysandra a silver arrow for emergencies, like my brother's ego. The final test comes unexpectedly. A wildfire. It crests the northern hills at dawn, hungry and relentless. The shepherds scramble, gather the flocks, wet the pastures, pray to gods they now know are listening. Apollo watches from his chariot, hands clenched. He could stop it with a thought, but should he? Lysandra doesn't wait for divine intervention. She's already herding sheep toward the river, shouting orders. Spots the rams stragglers into line. And then Apollo sees it. A child separated from the group, trapped by advancing flames. The choice crystallizes. He lands as Apollo, gold and terrible, and walks into the fire. The mortals fall to their knees. The child stares up, wide-eyed, as he lifts her to safety. Then, because he can't help himself, he turns and sings, not a hymn, the stupid sheep-herding song from the taverns. The fire halts, the wind shifts, and for the first time in history, a wildfire obeys a musical cue. When it's over, the village is saved. The shepherds are shell-shocked. And Lysandra? She marches up and punches Apollo's shoulder. That's for showing off. Now help rebuild the fences. Historians still argue whether this was true divine intervention or just really good timing. But here's a quirky tidbit. After this, the region's shepherds developed a tradition of singing to calm livestock during storms, always in the same off-key tune Apollo used. Apollo never officially quits his shepherd gig. Oh, he returns to godhood. The sun won't drive itself, and Delphi's backlog of prophecies is reaching absurd levels. But every so often, villagers report seeing a suspiciously radiant stranger helping with stubborn flocks. The advice is always terrible. Have you tried asking the sheep nicely? The lyre playing too perfect, and the footprints left behind smell faintly of laurel. Lysandra becomes something of a legend herself. She never marries, never leaves the pasture, and when travelers ask why she smiles at the sky sometimes, she just says, "Inside joke with the sun." As for Spots the ram, the little terror lives to the ripe old age of 14, terrorizing 3 generations of shepherds and one very patient sun god who visits annually with apples. His horns eventually adorn the temple at Delphi, right above the No petting the oracle sign. And if the mortal songs grow wilder with each retelling, well, Apollo may or may not be ghostwriting a few. The fire's embers glow softer now, the night settling around you like a well-worn cloak. Can you almost hear it? The distant bleat of sheep, the whisper of a lyre string in the breeze, or maybe just the quiet hum of the fan you turned on earlier. Apollo's story reminds us that even gods need to step away sometimes, to trade gold for grass stains and remember what makes the work worth doing. And perhaps we mortals aren't so different. Our own pastures waiting just beyond the daily grind, our own chances to walk a mile in someone else's sandals or shepherd's crook. So breathe deep, let the images fade. The spotted ram, the singing fire, the sun god with blisters on his palms. Tomorrow's another day, for gods and mortals alike. But tonight is for rest,